Hi, it's Samantha from Samantha by Design. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. Thank you for joining me for today's acrylic painting tutorial where I'll be teaching you how to paint this little ocean beach. Let's get started. Alrighty, so as you saw today, we are going to be tackling an ocean beach, and first of all, I'm going to be showing you guys how to grid this. The reference images are in the description below. I'm making my grid into 2-inch squares, so let's grid first and then we'll go over the rest of the materials that we need. So since my grid's in 2-inch squares for an 8x10, I'm going to place my ruler down and then mark it at every 2 inches on every side of my canvas. 2, 4, 6, 8. I'm doing every side so that my lines line up. If you want to be more precise, you could use a T-square and then you wouldn't have to line every side. You can just do the top and the side. But since my T-square is gigantic, it doesn't fit on this table. So we're going to line up every side so that we're sure we match up. Alright, and then you're just going to line it up and create your grid. Again, we're going to simplify the reference photo a little bit again because I do want to keep this extremely beginner friendly. Eventually we'll go into more detailed tutorials, but if you're just learning how to paint, I don't want to discourage you from trying to put in every single little detail. So we're going to keep it as simple as possible and still get you an awesome beach painting. Now, a lot of mistakes that I see with beginners trying to paint oceans and beaches and anything with water is that their horizon line is a little bit crooked. But here, I prepared a little experiment here for us. So when you hold your water bottle, no matter which way you hold it, the water's always going to level itself out. It's always going to find its way to be leveled. And you won't ever have a horizon line that's curved. So now that we have our grid in, we're going to take a look at our reference picture. And we're going to draw what we see. Let me pull mine up here. Pictures. All right. So if you look at your reference, I've provided it in the reference, the description below, we see that the ocean, or the horizon, starts exactly almost in the middle. It's a little bit lower than the halfway point. So what I'm going to do is draw a line as straight as I can, just right below our square, to mark that this is where our ocean starts, right here. And to grid, I am using a watercolor pencil so that it will blend in with my paint and you won't even notice that I used it. If you are using graphite, do so with a light hand so that your painting doesn't have a gray cast over it, because it can wash into the paint and turn your colors a little bit gray. So just use a super light hand. And then we see that in our sky there's a bunch of clouds and stuff, but we're not going to worry about that just quite yet. We're just going to block in our basic shapes. And then our sea foam starts about here. We're going to drop down, and again I'm just looking for the outline of the foam. I'm not trying to draw it exactly, I'm just trying to get the basic shape of it. And this one comes down about halfway, and we're just going to keep angling it until we reach the corner here. So we know that this part here is our ocean, this is our sky, and we have some sand down here. And then if you look even closer, you can see that we go from this nice turquoise color to kind of a gray beige color where the sea foam and the ocean meets the sand here, where it's a little bit more shallow. So we can go ahead and mark a little bit of that too, so we know when to transition colors. So it's about halfway this square. It's almost a straight line. Kind of meets up over here. So this part's a little bit more of a gray color. where we're gonna start blending the sand and the watercolors together to make a nice transition. So that's all we're gonna do for our grid. We have our basic block ends, which is perfect. And now we're gonna go over the rest of the material. So let me get this out of the way. We will be using, for the sky first, we're going to use some ultramarine blue, burnt umber, some titanium white. We're also going to be using burnt sienna. We're going to use a phthalo green blue shade. The blue shade is important here. I also took out my yellow shade, phthalo blue, so I could show you guys the difference. You can sort of see it on camera here, but I'll mix it with some white to show you guys the difference as to why we want the blue shade and not the yellow shade for this painting in particular. I'm also going to be using phthalo blue and some unbleached titanium, as well as some yellow oxide. And that's all we're going to be using today for paint colors. I took out my brushes. I grabbed a 1-inch bright brush. I also grabbed 2 smaller bright brushes that are a little bit roughed up. They're scruffy. They definitely don't hold their shape anymore. If you see this, that's going to be perfect for some seafoam. And this one is going to be perfect for putting in our clouds. If you don't have a little scruffy bright brush, you can use a dome blender like this. This brush is actually from a pack at Walmart, so they're quite accessible, and I really enjoy them. We're also going to be using a 1/2-inch angle brush. I also want to show you that you can do clouds with what's called a Willows blender from Princeton. This is the 1/4-inch one. We're going to need some small details to put shadows and on our seafoam, and also little details, and a palette knife to mix up colors, or you can use your brush if you don't have any of these. We have our 8x10 canvas that we've gridded. I have a cup of coffee, but you can grab whatever drink you like. I have a nice candle lit to make this a little bit more relaxing, a paper towel, a cup of water, and also a foam plate. So let's get started here. We're going to, first we're only going to put out the colors we need for the sky so that the rest of our paint doesn't dry out. And as usual, I also have my little water mister to keep my paint moist while I wet. Moist while I paint, not while I wet. I'm not wetting the paint all that much. All right. So for the sky, we're going to be using a mixture of phthalo blue and ultramarine blue with a tiny bit of burnt umber. And some white. So the ultramarine blue and the burnt umber make a nice gray color. And then the phthalo blue is going to give us that nice tropical blue color that we're looking for. And it's also fun to use your sky color to put in the ocean as well to make your painting a little bit more cohesive. So I'm going to go ahead and mist this, and we are going to get mixing. I'm just going to pull out my reference again so that I can get the perfect mix. We're going to grab a little bit of phthalo blue, some ultramarine, about equal amounts, and we're going to smush them together with our palette knife. Smush, smush, smush. And that's a little too bright, so we're going to, there's a hair on my palette knife. We're going to gray it with the burnt umber. I may have put a little bit too much burnt umber, so we'll just add a little bit more phthalo blue. And a little bit more ultramarine. And this looks a little crazy right now, but we're just going to add white and it'll be a nice sky color. So just add some white to this to see where your color's at. So I grayed it a little too much, so I'm just going to keep adding some blue until I get a color that I'm happy with. Alright, it's still a little bit too gray, so we're just going to add more phthalo. That's fine if that happens, don't worry about it. You can always fix your color mix. Put out more phthalo blue. We'll put out more ultramarine. And we'll just keep adding this to the mix until we get a color that looks like the sky in our reference. And there we go, we're getting pretty close. Okay. That's not too bad. We can always grab more phthalo or ultramarine on our brush as we're blending. So I'm going to put that in water. I'm going to add more white to my palette. I'm running out of white, so it's making messes everywhere. I take a sip of my coffee. Alright, let's start putting in our sky. If you're uncomfortable with making a straight line, we can use what's called painter's tape to block off our horizon. So you don't have to worry about making a completely straight line with your paintbrush. I'm going to show you guys this technique. It might be a little easier for beginners. Sorry, my cat is having the zoomies as I'm teaching, which isn't ideal. Sorry about the excess noise. Alright, so I'm just going to burnish this down. I'm going to press it down into the canvas, so then that way when I get to the horizon line I don't have to worry about it. I can just keep on painting. And what we're going to do, if you look at your reference, you know that the sky is going from dark to light. So we're going to add our dark color first and then create a gradient into the lightest blue at the bottom here. And then we're going to give it a dry and we'll add the clouds on top afterwards. So I don't want you to worry about the clouds yet. I'm going to grab my 1-inch brush. I'm going to dip it in the water, wipe off the excess and blot it off on the paper towel. Again, if you test it on your hand, you should feel that your brush is damp, but it shouldn't be dripping. You shouldn't have an excess pool of water on your skin. And we're just going to start putting in our sky color. I'm going to grab the dark color mix that we've done here. I'm going to grab a little bit more blue on my brush. And a tiny little bit of this mixture here so that it's not completely our darkest color. I'm going to keep my reference beside me as a guide. And we're just going to start putting this on. You can use little crisscross motions, back and forth. We'll probably have to do another coat on this. But we'll put our darkest color on the top, and if you see the dark color goes a little bit past the first square, so we're just going to paste that in. I'm going to just get my edges here. I am painting on an 8x10. This scales up very nice on a 16x20 and the grade will still work. Okay. So I've taken it to about here and you can see that it's streaky. That's normal. The blues that we're using are fairly transparent. So now I'm going to grab some white on my brush. I'm not rinsing it. It's loaded messily like this. I'm going to go just underneath it. And if your paint is kind of streaky like this, there's a hair in mine. Just going to pick that up and take it off. If your paint is doing this little streaky thing, it's because your brush isn't wet enough. So just dip the corner in water and blot the rest off on the paper towel. And then keep on going. Sorry about the cat. And now once we have this little line here, it'll be easier to blend because now the paint is mostly off my brush. I'm going to go right off the canvas so I don't leave a brush stroke, and then we'll get this nice gradient. Okay, and then we'll just keep adding white until we get to the bottom. The bottom is fairly light. white. And acrylic paint does dry a little bit darker than when you first put it on. So keep that in mind. If you think your color's a little too light, it'll dry darker than what it is. So I'm going right over this tape and blending in. You can take it all the way up and then all the way back down. Now I have excess paint on the sides here, so I'm just going to take my finger and wipe it off. You can use a paper towel if you're not sure if you have any allergies. I'm going to wipe the excess paint off my brush and just smooth it out a little bit more. Like this. That's pretty good for our first coat for the sky. Now what I'm going to do is you can either let it dry naturally on its own, or you can use a hair dryer on the cool setting. So I'm going to go ahead and blow dry mine for the sake of keeping this tutorial a little bit on the quicker side. And I'm very impatient when it comes to paint drying, so I like to use the hair dryer. So I'll dry this on the cool setting. I'll go rinse out my brushes and get some fresh water, and then we'll meet back here for the second layer of the sky. All right, our painting is nice and dry. It's cool to the touch. I've left the tape on. And now we're gonna do a second coat, and I wanna show you that you can also do it with a brush like this. This is a filbert. I left mine in the water and the handle kind of cracked. That's why it's taped. But we're gonna do a second coat. We're basically gonna do the exact same thing from the darkest color to the lightest. Then we'll give that a blow dry and work on our clouds. So I'm going to get our brush a little bit damp, wipe off the excess water. Okay, I'm testing it on my hand to make sure it's not soaking wet. I'm going to grab both of my blues and I'm going to start working that in the corner here and then make my way across the canvas. Just going back and forth with my brush. Okay, and the sky is fairly dark blue for the most part on the top here. Okay, we're going to grab a little bit of white. Mix that in, and we're going to start lightening it. So I'm going to get most of the paint off my brush before I start trying to blend it. You can wipe it off on the paper towel, and then I'm going to use very, very light pressure to blend those two colors together. And then as I work my way down, we're just going to keep adding more light colors. I do want to keep it fairly dark up here though, so I'm just going to grab the darkest color again and just blend down into that. And then it lightens up fairly quickly in our reference image. So I'm not going to grab any more blue, I'll just keep adding white. If your paint is skipping, just grab a little extra water on your brush, wipe off the excess on the paper towel, and then just keep working that in. Again, I'm getting most of the paint off my brush before I try to blend, or else it'll just overpower the whole previous color and then you won't get a nice gradient. Again, I'm using light pressure to blend. Okay, a little bit more water, more white. And working my way down all the way to the bottom of the canvas. Well, the bottom of where our tape ends or begins. And we're gonna work our way up a little bit, blend, blend, blend. Wipe off the excess paint from the sides. I'm going to rinse my brush real quick and we'll add a little bit more dark blue, because the more I'm looking at my reference, I need a little bit more dark blue in the sky. So I'm just again going to grab this mix we have here and just darken that a little bit. If your paint is starting to dry and it's getting tacky, maybe wait for it to fully dry before you try to do this so that you don't lift up any paint. Okay, so it's a little streaky. I'm going to grab some white and we're just going to blend that in. Okay, and I'm keeping my brush strokes horizontal because our sky is showing us that it's facing this direction. Sorry, I couldn't find my words there. It's hard to paint and talk at the same time. And I'm just going to grab more white here for the horizon. It'll be the lightest at the horizon because it's technically what's furthest away from us. So this dark blue patch here would be what we're seeing on top of the sky, and then this horizon is what's closest to us. So I'm going to rinse off my brush. We'll give this a blow dry one more time, and then we're going to add our clouds. So either let it dry naturally or blow dry it on the cool setting, and we'll be right back. All right, our painting is nice and dry, and we went from the dark to the light color in a nice gradient. It is cool to the touch, it's not tacky. Now we're going to start working on our clouds, and I want to show you guys that if you don't feel comfortable just pasting them in, this is a piece of kids' school chalk. I used to write on blackboards with this. Mine's a little bit small and flat because I use it to make my own traceables. But I just want to show you that if you don't feel comfortable just picking a random spot to put a cloud in, you can draw the outline with kids' chalk and it erases off the canvas fairly easily. If you just grab a little bit of paper towel or a damp brush, you can just wipe it right up. So kids' chalk is a good tool if you want to sketch it in on top of your paint and you don't want to use a pencil. You can paste in your clouds that way. But I'm just going to pick a spot and go with it. So if you look at your reference, the clouds aren't bright white. So I'm going to use my little bright brush. This is about 1/4 inch. It's a stiff bristle brush. It's not a soft brush. And what we're going to do is take a little bit of our white, a little bit of the ultramarine blue, just a little tiny bit. It's okay if it mixes in with our previous blue. A tiny corner of burnt umber. And some white. We're going to start with an off-white. We don't want it pure white. And I'm going to get most of the paint off of my brush. I don't want a ton of paint on here. You can see there's no globs. There is a cat hair though, so we're just going to take that off. And we're going to start with the little cloud that we see in the corner of our painting up here. So what I'm going to do is use the corner of the brush and do some little circular motions. You want to keep these shapes irregular. They don't have to be perfect. Your mind will definitely know that these are clouds. And what I'm not doing is what we learned in school when we were children. I'm just going to grab a darker blue to show you. So I'm not making clouds like this. I'm doing irregular shapes, kind of like this, and I'm fading out the bottom edge, keeping it soft. Okay? So I don't know if you guys saw that or understood that reference, but I'm not making perfect little fluffy clouds like you learned when you were in art class in kindergarten. And then there's little wispies. This one's kind of going up this way. I'm using a light pressure. There's not a lot of paint on my brush. If you get a hard edge and you want to blend with your finger, that's fine. And I'm also not using a pure white. This is white tinted with a little bit of blue. I am using a circular motion, but I'm not making perfect shapes. So we got our little clouds in the corner here. We'll grab a little bit more paint on our brush. Then there's like a big one right here. So we're just going to do the same thing. Just do an irregular shape. If you get a hard edge, just smooth it out with your finger. Okay. Now the key to this, to getting nice clouds, is not to have a ton of paint on your brush. and not to fuss with it too much. If I were to scrub too much in one area, I would lift the paint completely off the canvas. Okay, so there we go. We got another cloud. We can add a little wispy up here. And if you notice on your reference as well, the clouds on the top are bigger because they're technically closer to us, whereas the clouds on the horizon, they're more flat. They have less of a noticeable shape because they're further away from us. So I'm going to grab a little bit more white into this off blue here. Okay, and then there's another cloud up here, kind of flat over there. It comes down. Smudge it out. Okay, circular motions. I'm not using a ton of pressure here. They don't have to be exactly like the reference. I'm just following the general idea of them. Okay. A little more white into this blue. Take some paint on our brush, and my brush is dry. I didn't wet it beforehand. And then we do have a cloud that's coming from almost the corner here. And it's doing a diagonal line. There's a bump here. Don't worry if some of the sky is still showing through. Clouds are transparent, right? So it's completely fine. Okay, so I'm using mostly the corner of the brush. Light pressure, scrubbing in a circle and making these irregular shapes. And the key to this is not having a ton of paint on my brush. So this cloud comes down almost to the halfway mark of our sky. And then it comes back up a little bit like this. So you can do a basic outline shape like this to make sure you're going in the right direction. And then just keep fidgeting with it. Circular motions. Don't scrub too long in one spot. Kind of diverges. So this is the same technique we used for the galaxy painting tutorial and also the sunset. We're just painting actual white clouds this time. And then this cloud kind of flattens out here. Just going to keep scrubbing and adding some clouds. You can pause, take a screenshot if you want your clouds to match mine. There's too much paint on my brush, so that's fine. It's okay. We'll just blend it out by scrubbing a little bit. Okay. Now it kind of comes down. And it's going to connect with another cloud that's coming from here. A little bit more paint on my brush. So you don't have to match the shapes exactly. I'm just following the basic form of them. Like the direction that they're pointing us. Going back over this one. More paint on my brush. And these two clouds connect. So keep scrubbing. If your paint is starting to feel a little tacky on your brush, you can get your brush in some water and tap off the excess water on the paper towel. If your paint's feeling sticky on your palette, you can also mist it. We're just going to keep adding these clouds. A little bit more blue in there. Okay, so these are kind of connecting here. Fade out the bottom. There's some little wispies in here. Again, if you liked your guy before you added clouds. You don't have to add the clouds. It is your painting. I find they do add character, so I will add my clouds. Just little wispy bits. I'm just using what's left on my brush here. That I barely have any paint on here to add just little wispy clouds in the distance. And then these two had connected. So we're going to connect them with whatever's left on our brush. Alright, now we're closer to the horizon. We're going to use a little less of this mixture that we made, a little bit more ultramarine blue. That's our more violet blue. It pulls more on the red shade. Okay, so we're going to make a very light version of the ultramarine blue. So we did this. This one also kind of connects like this, and it leaves a big gap. So I'm just sketching the basic outline of it, and this one also connects to this cloud here. So random shapes. Okay. I'm going to fill it in. That's too much paint on my brush. Fill it in. This one basically goes all the way to the bottom. So we're just going to keep blending that in using circular motions, moving around so that we're not scrubbing directly into one spot. There's a little blue showing here. If you take out too much of the blue as well of the original sky color, don't worry, we could put it back in once our clouds are dry. Now there's little wispies here as well. And we're going to go right up to our tape, right up to our horizon line. Grab some more ultramarine blue, a little bit more white. Take some of the paint off our brush, we don't want too much. And we're just going to scrub this in all the way across the canvas. If you see on the grid here, we're going to take it right across. So again, the key here is I don't have a lot of paint on my brush. I am using random shapes. My brush is a stiffer bristled brush. It's not soft. Okay. Okay, so that's our first layer of clouds. By now, these ones up here should be a little bit more dry. So what I'm going to do is rinse my brush and get some of that blue off of it. Wipe it off on a paper towel. I'm just going to move that so I have a clean spot here. I'm going to squeeze the bristles to get most of this water out because I'm still working on clouds. I don't want a very wet brush. And now we're going to add more white than blue. We're going to add some highlights to our clouds. If you like yours like this, leave them like this. But if you want to take, again, I'm not pure white, but almost. More white than blue. And I'm going to pick random spots on my clouds, and I'm just going to highlight some of them. So I'm not doing the whole clouds, I'm just picking random spots and just adding a tiny bit of white to them. And then maybe this one, we can add some like this. So just be random with this. The more you're trying to precisely do it, the less realistic it's going to look. So you can hold your brush further back if you want less control. Just be extremely random with this. We're highlighting the clouds. So again, more white than blue. Pick a random little spot you want a little bit brighter. And just scrub it in. Keep it random. Okay, there we go. Add some to this. So we're not outlining the clouds because they wouldn't just be highlighted on the outside. We're just picking random spots and adding a little bit more of a white color to them. Because clouds have a lot of layers, they're very dimensional. So they would have highlights and shadows, just like everything else that we paint. A little bit more white. Again, I'm keeping irregular shapes. I'm trying not to keep hard lines. There's not a lot of paint on my brush. Here. Okay, if you want to smooth it out with your finger, go ahead. A little bit more white here. Connect these clouds. So I'm not doing the entire cloud, I'm leaving some spots darker. And we're just going to keep scrubbing in, adding highlights. If you add too many highlights, you can just go back afterwards and just add in your mid-tone again. Keep it random. That looks pretty great. And then we're going to add a little bit more white here as well. Highlight these clouds. And it looks like your clouds have more dimension, they're more 3D, because whatever is lighter gets pushed forward and whatever is darker looks like it's a little bit further back or in shadow. A little bit more white. So I'm using mostly white here, whereas before we had a very, very light blue. Now we're using mostly white. And this place down here is fairly light, so we're going to scrub in some light colors. And again, the clouds down here are going to be smaller because they are the furthest thing away from us. It's also why the sky looks lighter. If you go outside right now and look at the sky right above you is way darker than if you look out into the distance. So I'm going to add little cloud shapes down here. Make sure the horizon is nice and light. Then we can add a couple little whispers here. And now, there's a little bit more blue in here that I took out. So I'm just going to touch to make sure it's not soaking wet there. The paint is almost dry because I don't want to lift it off. But I'm going to grab a little bit more of the mid-tone sky color that we had. So ultramarine blue, a little bit of the phthalo, wipe off the excess, a little bit of white. So I'm getting a color like this. It's a little bit darker than what we used for the clouds. I'm going to wipe off some excess and I'm just going to add in a little bit more blue colors down here. Kind of shadows of the clouds or sky poking through, because I did take out a lot of it. Okay. A little bit of phthalo. Mix those two together, grab some white. And we'll add a little bit of shadows to these ones too. Might as well, since we have some paint on our brush. Again, I'm picking random spots. I'm moving across this fairly quickly so that I can't think about making shapes. Smudge it in with your finger. And there we go. That's all we're going to do for our sky. This is a beginner painting. If I was painting this for myself or if it was a commission for a client, I would go in way more details, but for a beginner, this is perfect. It looks like a sky. It's beautiful. You did a great job. Now we can peel off our tape because we're going to start working on the ocean. Wow, look at that. That's beautiful. So we're going to need more paint on our canvas. So I'll put my tape over here. Take a sip of whatever you're drinking. You've earned it. Look at this beautiful sky you created. But before we start working on our water, I want to have clean water so that we don't get random mixtures in here. So I'm going to go rinse these brushes and get them out of the water. Change the water and let this dry a little bit. So we'll be right back with some clean water and some clean brushes. Okay, so we got some clean water. Our paper towel is a little bit messy, but that's fine. Our brushes are rinsed. And now we're going to start working on our water. So it's a nice turquoise color, so I'm going to make sure I still have some phthalo blue on my plate. I have some. I'm just going to put out a little bit more. We still have ultramarine. We have a little bit of burnt umber, which is great. We're going to need a tiny bit of burnt sienna on there. Again, the phthalo blue and burnt sienna also tone each other out, just like the burnt umber and the ultramarine. So we're just going to put out a little bit of that. I'll flip it this way so you can see it more. And then we're going to use the phthalo green blue shade. And I'm going to demonstrate why we're using the blue shade instead of the yellow shade, because there are two different phthalo greens. So I'm going to put the yellow right on top here. We just need a little bit. I just want to demonstrate the difference if you use white with it. So I'm going to grab a brush. I'll grab this one. So this is the yellow shade here. If you mix this with white, it gives you this beautiful, beautiful yellow-green color, which is perfect for foliage or other types of water. But for this tropical water, there's no yellow-green. It's more of like a beautiful aqua turquoise color. So this is the phthalo green blue shade. Grab some white. And this one's this nice minty color. You would use this to paint eucalyptus, but I think you can see the difference here. This one definitely pulls more on the yellow and this one more on the blue. And when you mix that blue shade with the phthalo blue green shade, you get this beautiful color called phthalo turquoise. And with more white, it's exactly the color of the water that we need. Okay, so that's why we're using blue shade instead of green shade. If all you have is green shade, that's fine. You can use that too. Use what you have. I'm just explaining what I'm doing to make your life a little bit easier. So we'll be using blue shade for the purposes of this. I will also be putting out some yellow oxide. I'll put it right on top here. And unbleached titanium. You can use Titan Buff if you're using a different brand. Unbleached titanium and Titan Buff are pretty similar. I love this color. We might as well put out a tiny bit more burnt umber. Sorry, my palette's a little messy here, but I'll tell you what colors I'm using for what. We still have white, so we're good on that. Okay, so I think we're good to start. Now, if you don't want to mess up this nice straight horizon line you just painted, you can put a piece of tape this way so that you don't have to worry about the sky. But at this point, I'm fairly confident that I could paint this straight line, so I'm not going to tape mine off again. And if you look at your reference, we see that the sky is lighter at the bottom, but the ocean is actually darker at the horizon than when you come forward. So we're going to use a dark, dark, dark shade of blue here for the horizon line. And then we're going to fade it into this nice aqua turquoise color. And then where we did this line here, it starts to take a little bit of the sand color as well. And then our sea foam is going to come in. So we're going to mix some colors first. So for our horizon, we can take the sky color that we had and then put it at a random spot on your palette here. Find a clean spot. We're going to grab some of this green and we're going to mix it in. And it's going to make this nice turquoise color. Right now it's looking kind of dark, but that's exactly what we want. A little bit more phthalo blue in there. And then to up the darkness even a little bit more, we're going to add a tiny little bit of burnt sienna. Okay, so just mix that in. We want a nice dark color. All right, put that in the water so that the paint doesn't dry. And since this is a smaller spot, I'm going to use a smaller brush. So I moved on to my 1/2 inch angle brush. But you use whatever brush you're comfortable with. This brush has softer bristles, so I'm going to get the brush nice and damp. Wipe off the excess water. I'm going to mist my palette, and we're going to start with a nice dark color here for the horizon line. So I'm going to grab a little bit more phthalo blue on my brush. And again, I'm not using a big glob, and when I pull paint from my palette, I'm not going in the middle. I'm pulling it from the side of the paint plop. And then I'm going to get some of this color as well. We want it fairly dark but still on the blue side. All right, there we go. That's very, very nice color. And now we're going to make a straight line with our darkest color across the horizon here. So if again you're not comfortable making a straight line, you can tape up here. Just make sure that this is nice and dry first, because you don't want to peel the tape off. And if you don't have painter's tape but you want to tape it off with Scotch tape, just take it on your jeans or on a blanket and just tap it a little bit to remove some of the tackiness so that you don't peel the paint off and ruin all your hard work. So also, if you're not comfortable making a straight line this way, and my canvas is taped so that it doesn't move, you can move your canvas whatever way. I'm left-handed, but if you're right-handed, you could take it this way if you're more comfortable going up and down. I personally like turning it on an angle like this and moving this way. And I'm not moving my wrist, I'm moving my entire arm to get that straight line. So I'm just going to get a little bit more water on my brush here so that it flows nicely. And we're just going to make a nice horizon line right across. Oh, that's such a nice color. I love this color so much. Okay, take it right across. Your line doesn't need to be extremely perfectly straight, just straight enough, because water would level, so your horizon line wouldn't be going up and down. Even if there are waves back here, the horizon will always be straight. Okay, so just make a nice line. I'm using my angle brush, but you use whatever brush. See, I made a little mistake here. So I'm going to take a nice damp, this brush is damp because I just washed it, and I'm just going to wipe up my little mistake and put that brush in water so that little bit of paint doesn't dry on there and ruin my brush. And we're just going to paste this on the horizon. Make sure we're covering all the white bits of the canvas. We don't want to see the canvas through it. Okay, now we can take it down a little bit. And if it's streaking, that's perfect. It'll make some waves. And again, with the water, I'm keeping the brush strokes extremely directional, so all horizontal. I'm not going to paint the water vertical because, again, it is level, just like the sky. So we want to create that illusion by doing this. So I'm going to take this down a little bit lower than in the reference, because we're going to do some blending. All right, so now we got our nice dark horizon line. We can start adding some white paint to this. Grab a little bit more green, a little bit more phthalo blue. I love this color. Some white. Okay, and we can start blending this in. So keep your brush strokes horizontal. You can go into this horizon line that we made, because there's only a little sliver of the darkest color here. Okay, there we go. If you take out too much, don't worry, we'll add it back in, but we just want a little sliver of the dark horizon. I'm going to wipe off some paint from my brush because I want my water a little bit more green. Blue. Sorry, you can't see what I'm mixing. This nice green blue color, some white. And then we're going to keep going until we reach this sandy color. Again, I'm keeping my brush strokes horizontal, and the closer we get to the bottom, the more light it's going to be. So just keep adding white. Keep those brush strokes horizontal. Adding some more white. A little bit more blue. It's okay to vary the colors because, again, it is water, so it has different depths. Just make sure, rule of thumb, that it's horizontal. And now I got to the line, whoops, where we're meeting the sand color. So what I'm going to do is just get this in here. A lot more white. I just put some white on top and I'm just going to blend it in. Again, horizontal motions. Paint my sides. Okay, a lot more white. Now we're at the part where the sand is starting to meet up. So I'm going to add some yellow oxide to my mixture and some unbleached titanium, and we're gonna get this funky green color, which is exactly what we want. And maybe we'll even add a little bit of burnt umber. Perfect. And now we're going to take this in, add some more white to this. We want this funky, sandy color. More yellow, more unbleached titanium. Blend it in. Soft, soft pressure when I'm blending, and then harder pressure to lay some paint down. See, I can get some paint off my brush here. But then when I'm blending, let's see, you can add some white like this if you'd like. And then just streak it in. Take this all the way down to the seafoam color. The seafoam line, I mean, sorry, not the color. You can add a little bit more greeny blue in here. Just get this nice blend, some more unbleached titanium. If your paint is starting to dry and it doesn't want to blend, just let it dry completely so that you don't lift up your paint from the canvas. Okay. We're going to take this color down all the way to the bottom here. I'm going to get more water on my paint because, on my brush, sorry, because my paint isn't flowing as nicely. Take it all the way down. More unbleached titanium, and just kind of go over that line here so that we have a nice transition. Okay, I'm going to rinse out my brush quickly before it all dries. Get the excess water off of there. I'm just going to grab some more of my ocean color and just blend that again. Get more of that nice turquoise aqua color. And just blend this in a little bit better. Alright, so you should have something that looks like this. And maybe we'll grab a little bit more of the aqua color here. Go over this little spot here. There's a funky spot, and I would just want to take care of that. If your paint is starting to dry, again, stop messing with it and let it dry completely. And now, since our brush is already dirty, we're going to rinse off most of this blue color. Actually, we're just going to let this dry completely. I don't want to add too many steps in one. So now we're going to let this dry or blow dry it on the cool setting. Don't put your finger in it. If you do put your finger in it, like I just did, just take a clean brush and just smooth up your fingerprint. I'm going to mist my palette. And we will be doing a second coat on this as well. And now we're going to let this dry or blow dry it. I'm going to get some fresh water and clean these brushes with some soap and water so that they're not sitting in here because you don't want your handle to crack. Alright, so we'll be right back. Okay, so our painting is nice and dry, cool to the touch. I got some fresh water here. I moved my plate a little bit so you can see more of the colors. And now we're just going to add a second layer of this beach here, of the ocean, just to refine the colors a little bit more. And I'm going to keep using my angle brush. Use whatever brush you're comfortable with that's given you a nice result. So my brush is damp, but not soaking wet. I'm going to grab our dark horizon color, get a little bit of phthalo blue with it. If you had none left of this horizon color, we had mixed phthalo blue with a little bit of the sky color that we had mixed, which was the phthalo blue, the ultramarine, and the burnt umber. We used phthalo green blue shade and some burnt sienna to make our horizon color. So I'm just going to go ahead and touch up the horizon. So again, I'm going to move the canvas instead of moving my body. And we're just going to add in another layer to the horizon line to really get it nice and dark. And again, I'm keeping my brush strokes horizontal. That is going to be the key to making your painting even better. All right, nice dark horizon. And now we're going to get some blues, mix it in with this turquoise. Rinse off my brush because I don't want too much pigment on there. Wipe it off on the paper towel. I'm going to grab some white, put it into this turquoise mixture here. Oh, I love this color so much. And we're going to start putting this in. Horizontal brush strokes. We're going to go a little bit over the horizon line because we only need a little sliver of it. Whoops, too much white. Go. Blend, blend, blend. Okay, so horizontal brush strokes. Barely a sliver in our picture. But it's definitely there, so make sure your horizon's slightly darker, just like that. And then just keep adding white as you go down. If your paint is not flowing, just grab a little bit extra water and just blend this all in. A lot more white. And again, I'm keeping my brush strokes horizontal. Mixing the phthalo blue with the phthalo green, some white. And then when I get to this sandy color again, I'm going to grab some unbleached titanium, a little bit of yellow oxide or yellow ochre, they're interchangeable, some white. My brush is nice and messy. I'm just going to plop that on like this and then just blend that in. Light pressure to blend. You can use your finger. That's a little too greeny blue for my liking, so I'm just going to grab some more unbleached titanium and some yellow oxide and just cover that up. And blend, blend, blend. I'm not worried too much about this part because it will be mostly seafoam. I'm mostly worried about the ocean. So rinse out your brush, wipe off the excess water, and now we're going to add a little bit more highlights and shadows like in the picture. So I'm going to grab the dark horizon color that we mixed. I'm just going to dab it on a little bit because I did take out some of it up here. Okay, there we are. And then here in our reference, it's a little bit darker. Whoops, I pulled up the information instead. So it's a little bit darker. You can use a little bit of white. And we're going to keep these strokes horizontal and we're creating tiny little waves in the distance. I'm using the edge of my brush. It is pressed nice and flat like this. And I'm just doing little motions. There's barely any paint on my brush and the background paint is still wet. If it's dry, it'll give you the same effect. but I'm just going to add these little horizontal brush strokes like this, a little bit more blue, a little bit of white. We're just going to keep adding these little brush strokes to make it look like very distant waves. My pressure is very light. You can barely tell that I'm even doing anything, but in person you can tell the difference. More blue. Okay. Tiny little brush strokes. Keeping them all horizontal because water would be leveled. Now I'm grabbing quite a bit of white, some green and some blue. Too much paint on my brush, I'm just going to wipe some off. Get that nice turquoise color, some white, and then keep adding these little brush strokes, tiny little brush strokes. I'm not doing one line across, I'm picking up my brush, just making sure that everything is horizontal. And then way more white because we're getting way closer to the beach. Keep doing the same thing. These are distant little waves. My brush strokes are a little bit bigger the closer I get to the beach because it's closer to us. So this is super beginner basics on how to get easy waves. Then when I get to where the sand is starting to meet the beach, I'm just going to be a lot more random about it. Yeah, blend it in. Flip your brush. All these tiny brush strokes, and I'm not making a row of lines like that. I'm not worried about this because I'm going to cover it. I'm making little lines. I'm moving across the canvas, up and down, but all horizontal. But you don't want to do this on your canvas. That won't look realistic. So I'm making all these crazy brush strokes up and down, side to side, so that they do this, but they're all horizontal. You don't want to make a perfect line. It's not going to look like an ocean. Again, some more white. It's fairly light here, closer to the horizon. Okay. That looks pretty good. I'm going to add a little bit more sandy color to this, so rinse out your brush. Get most of the blue-green off of there. Wipe off the excess water. And now we're going to grab the unbleached titanium, the yellow oxide, more unbleached titanium than yellow oxide, a little smidge of burnt sienna, and a little smidge of burnt umber. We'll get this nice, almost yellow color, but more on the beigey side. I'm just going to paste it in at the bottom here, get some white in there, and lightly blend this into here. Go right over that seafoam line. Again, I'm keeping my brush strokes horizontal. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now I'm just going to add in a layer of sand. It's okay if my brush is still dirty. We're going to be doing another coat anyways. So I'm going to go into that unbleached titanium with a little bit of the yellow ochre or yellow oxide and a little bit of burnt umber. And we're just going to do one quick layer of sand. Just gonna meet that, and I'm covering all these little white dots that I left. And the sand is a little bit darker where it meets the water. And then it's going to get lighter as we come down closer to us. So I'm gonna grab some white and some unbleached titanium for this bottom part here. It's okay if there's a little bit of greeny blue on your brush. We'll be doing a second coat. We just want a base color to work with. Get this beautiful sand color in there, a little bit more white, a little bit of more unbleached titanium. It's okay if it doesn't match the reference perfectly. You can make your sand dark, you can make it lighter, you can make it white sand, pink sand. As long as you're following the basic techniques, your painting will look like a beach. All right. Now that we have that in, we're going to let it dry and then we will work on our sea foam. So again, I'm going to go change the water because I don't want to get any of that turquoise in the sea foam. So let's go rinse our water, let this dry, and then meet back up. All right, our painting is nice and dry and we are ready to start adding sea foam. So I'm going to use the same brush I used for my clouds right here. It is the flat brush, the bright brush, sorry, not flat. A flat's a little bit longer. If you're wondering the difference between a bright and a flat, this would be a flat, and this is a bright, it's a little bit more square. So this is the scrubby brush. You can use a dome brush again instead. I just really like this one for clouds and sea foam. You can use the Willow's blender if you have one of these. But basically we're just going to start laying in the foam, the basic outline of it first, and then we're going to use a detail brush to do the little wispy bits of foam that are coming in. And then after that we'll add a layer of sand. So what I'm going to do again, just like the clouds, I don't want it to be pure white. So I'm going to get some ultramarine blue with the white. You can even get a little bit of that horizon color if you'd like. And make a nice light blue color like this. Basically almost like the clouds, just with a little bit of that green color in. Wipe off the excess paint from your brush. Grab a little bit more white. Okay, but again, same thing as the clouds, the galaxy, everything we've painted with a scrubby motion. You don't want a lot of paint on your brush. So we're going to start with the outline of it. And we're going to start here. And we're just going to put our basic shape of the foam in. And don't worry, we'll be refining it with a detail brush. We just want to get the basic shape in. Okay, and it goes right to the corner here. Alright, so you can pause and take a screenshot of this shape right here where our sea foam is coming in. So I'm using light pressure, a very light blue color, and I'm just swiping this with my scrubby brush on the side and making a very random, irregular shape. It kind of comes out a little bit like this. Okay, there we go. And then we can start scrubbing in a little bit further. So there's a little nice line here of where the sea foam's a little bit more solid before it starts to break up into smaller little bits. So we're just going to, again, circular motion, random shape, and create a more solid version of the sea foam. Different heights. You don't want to create a perfect line, then it won't look realistic. Don't scrub in one spot for too long. Get more white in that light blue. We'll be adding highlights to the foam as well. Okay. So don't create a perfect straight line the same thickness all the way around. But we do want a more solid application of color closer to where that foam meets the beach. And then when it's further out into the ocean, we're going to break it up a little bit more. So scrub, scrub, scrub. It's pretty solid up here. So grab some more white, some more of that blue. That was a little bit too much paint on my brush, so I'm just going to wipe off the excess. Just keep scrubbing in a circular motion. And again, don't scrub too much in one spot because the paint will start to lift off. Just refine this bottom shape a little bit more. Okay, so while that's drying, we're going to leave our brush in the water so the paint doesn't dry on it. We're going to grab a small detail brush. We're going to get it in the jar nice and wet. We're going to grab this light blue color again and get our brush coated in the paint like this. And we're just going to start making random little lines. I'm holding my brush far away. I'm not holding it like a pencil at this point. I'm holding it a little bit further back so that I'm looser with my brush stroke and more random. And we're just going to start creating these little lines that kind of connect with each other and that other foam. These could be irregular in shape. As long as they're somewhat horizontal, it'll give the right effect. If your brush is skipping the paint around too much and leaving these little lines, you can add a little bit more water since we are working with a round brush. A small detail brush, it requires a little bit more water. But we're basically going to add these very random squiggly lines, kind of all interconnected, to the foam and the ocean. Okay. So I'm doing these kind of zigzaggy motions, but I'm keeping them fairly horizontal, like I'm not going up and down with this. More like a side to side motion. And keeping them very random. Try to create these thin lines. Leave some of that beach color showing through. Okay, that's why we have it there. Okay, hope you can see what I'm doing here, but I'm holding the brush far away and I'm just wiggling these tiny little lines to meet up with the sea foam that's on the shore. And I'm not covering up the entirety of the beach sand here that we did. And the further away from us they go, the smaller the lines are going to be. So when I get to about that part where we started adding the sand color to the ocean, I'm using even lighter pressure, making the brush strokes a little bit more horizontal than squiggly, and keeping them smaller because they are farther away from us. Then when I come closer to this horizon, not the horizon, but the sand, I'm going to start adding a little bit more pressure, making more noticeable squiggly lines to connect with the layer of foam that we just added. Get a little bit more water on my brush. You can go right into that foam. Very light pressure. I'm using my brush at kind of a 45-degree angle. I'm not using it straight up like this or straight like that. Like about 45-degree angle, light pressure back and forth, little squiggly lines. The further back I am, the smaller, more horizontal my lines are. And then the closer I am to the sea foam and the beach, the more random and squiggly I can be about it to make it look more realistic. And I don't have a ton of paint on my brush, which is also the key here. You don't want a big blob. Add a little bit here. Tiny little squiggly lines connected to that foam. little bit more water on the brush. Again, I'm not using pure white. This is very, very, very light blue. I'm going to add pure white when we add the highlights to our foam. More water on the brush. Again, we're doing more horizontal lines the further back we get, and then the closer we are to the beach, we can be more random with our applications. Light pressure. Okay, that's pretty good. Add a little bit more back here. A little bit more white, a little bit more of that blue. Connect it right into the sea foam. Okay, for our first layer, that is pretty good. I really, really like that. I hope you enjoyed that process too. If you look at your reference, there's a tiny little wave back here, so we can go ahead and put that in with this light blue and white as well. With this little brush, we're going to use the slightest amount of pressure. I'm going to hold my brush and brace my pinky to the table this time because I want a more controlled application. So I'm going to add a tiny little wave back here like this. And then it kind of skips a little bit of space here. Kind of like this. And then it breaks off a bit again. And then closer to the halfway mark, it starts up again. There's not enough paint on my brush, so I'm just going to reload it. Brace my pinky down. Add a little bit more of a wave. So again, I'm not making a continuous line. I'm looking at the reference and seeing where there's tiny little wave breaks in the far, far distance there. And then we can also add a couple more further away. So tiny little waves in the distance. They're not all going to be connected. Keep them horizontal. Use your fingers to smudge them out. All right, there we go. So now it looks like we have little distant waves coming into the shore, which would be making our sea foam possible. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to rinse our brush. And while our sea foam's drying, we're going to add another layer of our sand color here. So I'm going to grab my angle brush once again. And we're going to keep the sand closer to the foam, a little bit darker, and then it goes a little bit lighter down here. So I'm going to need a little bit more of that unbleached titanium. Put that on my palette. And I'm going to grab a tiny bit of the burnt sienna, a little bit of the burnt umber, some yellow oxide, and the unbleached titanium, a little bit more burnt umber for the darker parts. And again, you can make your sand more beige, more yellow, more red. It's completely up to you. I'm just going to go right next to that sea foam and darken this part of the beach a little bit more. And if you cover some of your sea foam, it's okay because we're going to go over it with highlights anyways. So I'm just going to darken up right next to the sea foam. Like this. And then I'm going to add a little bit more unbleached titanium and titanium white. And we're just going to blend this in. You can, again, use your fingers if you know you have no allergies and you're not going to have a reaction to the paint. You can use your fingers to blend this. Get the lighter color down there. Add some more white if you need it. Blend that in. Okay, you can go back in with the darker color, more burnt umber. Just add some back in if you took too much away. Blend it in. All right, that looks pretty darn good. Now we're going to go back to our detail brush, and this is where we're going to start using the pure white. So make sure it's not too wet, but wet enough for the paint to flow off of it, because we are using a smaller brush. If you're using craft paint, this is perfect because you won't have to thin it down as much, but this is what my brush is looking like. I'm going to dab off the excess water, but I'm going in with just pure white here. And I'm going to go over the edge of this foam, and we're going to make some random shapes, random squiggly lines. Blend that in with the top part of it, but I want this to be random. Okay, we're adding the highlights. Go across the bottom line here and just refine that. I'm being very random with my application. I'm using pure white. And I'm basically outlining the seafoam, but keeping it random shape so that it's not just a straight line across. And again, all of the information for this, all the materials, the reference images, the links to the social medias and stuff will be in the description box below. The people in my wonderful Facebook group have voted for this beach tutorial. So if you'd like a say on future tutorials, or you'd like to participate in the charity auction pieces, you can join the Facebook group down below. And then you can participate in all of the voting and whatnot. It's a lot of fun. Everyone's extremely supportive in there. I absolutely love my group so much. So there we go. I've outlined it, and now I'm going to go in. I'm pressing fairly hard. I'm twirling the brush around, but I'm creating another layer of highlights right above where we outlined. So I'm leaving some of that blue color that we had put down before, so that it looks like there's motion in our seafoam. So I'm not covering up the entirety of the blue. I'm leaving some spots. I'm being very, very random about it, where it's more solid. So I'm using my brush like kind of horizontally at this point. It's not using the point of the brush, I'm using the body of the brush, so like this instead of like this, and I'm just scrubbing this way. We're getting there. We are almost done the beach painting, you guys. Alright, so now I'm going to grab a little bit more water on the brush because I want the white paint to be a little bit more fluid. And now I'm going to go over some little bits of that seafoam that we randomized back there. So just pure white still. I'm going to highlight some bits, some of those squiggly bobs. Some I'll use lighter pressure, some I'll use a little heavier pressure. But again, general rule of thumb here is the further away you are, the more horizontal and the more thin the lines are going to be, and the closer you are, the more thick the lines could be, more random. The more you paint, the more you're going to notice these things in nature. Like the way the sky works and whatnot, and how the clouds that are directly on top of you look so much bigger than the little clouds in the distance. It's crazy how the world starts to change when you start to paint the world. little lines. I'm just highlighting some spots. I'm not covering up all the blue we just had. I might even do another round of highlights here. That looks amazing. All right, and now to kick it up an extra notch to make your painting look even more realistic, we're going to add a little shadow right underneath our seafoam. So we're going to do that by using our burnt umber, tiny bit of burnt sienna. So we're making a nice brown, and we're going to thin it down with some water so that it flows nicely and that it's transparent. But you don't want it to be leaking. Like, I'm turning my palette and the brown isn't leaking, but it's way more transparent than it was. And now, very, very light pressure, brace your hand, and we're going to go directly underneath the seafoam and just outline it in a very random motion. So just, again, don't make a perfect straight line. We're just going to add a little bit of darkness directly under it, and you can already see the difference. It looks like it's more three-dimensional. So just go right in there. I'm using the tip of the brush to get a nice thin line. Barely any pressure. If you get too much of a dark spot, just blend it out, either with a brush or with your fingers. Tap, tap, tap. Okay. More water on my brush. Just keep adding that light layer of brown paint right underneath that seafoam. This is really what's going to kick up your painting a notch and make it look that much more realistic. So I'm keeping it very random. I'm following the outline that I created, but I'm not making a perfect straight line. And the trick here is that my paint is thinned down so that I'm not getting this super thick application, so it looks like it's a shadow. That looks awesome. And then if you took out too much of the sand color here, you can go ahead and just mix some more up. So I'm going to grab some unbleached titanium, some white, a little bit of yellow oxide or yellow ochre, some some burnt sienna and some burnt umber. Just mix up a little bit more of that sand color. Let me get my brush a little bit more wet. And we can just add a little bit more sand back in as well if you took out too much. So you can go back in with some sand color right inside that foam. Again, I'm being very random with it, so I can show some sand through it. Because again, the foam wouldn't be covering the entirety of the sand that it's on top of. All right, there we go. A little bit more here. Rinse out your brush. And then again, we're going to grab some pure white. We're just going to add a couple more little highlights over top that sand we just added. Be careful with this because you don't want them to blend. I'm just going to add a little bit more white highlights to our foam. Very random. You can even go a little bit over these shadows you created. My paint's a little bit thicker on my brush this time. Go right up next to that shadow. There we go. Now all that's left to do is sign your painting, and you created a beach, so you can either sign it with a paint pen or you can sign it with your brush. I like to sign the back of my work personally, but I can show you guys real quick how to sign your work. So I'm going to use this little detail brush and get it nice and damp. I think I'm going to use the dark horizon color we had. so that it's cohesive with the painting. Or you can even use some brown. There you go, I like that color. I mixed some of that green horizon color in with some of the beach colors. I'm going to get my paint nice and liquid, kind of like the shadow. I'm just going to sign it. And there we go. I personally don't sign the front, so if you signed yours and your signature is weird, just grab a damp paper towel before it dries, and you can just wipe it right off. And there we go. So sign yours in the front, in the back, wherever you'd like, but make sure you sign it because you created this. You're an artist. Congratulations. Let's take a tour around the canvas, and that's it. That's all. So here's what the finished painting looks like. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell to be notified when I upload next. I'll be posting a new tutorial every Tuesday and Friday. If you followed along with me, please join my Facebook group in the description below and show me your work. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you a lot, and have a wonderful day. Bye!